Thank you everybody who joined today's webinar. My name is Nikhil and I'll be the host for today's meeting. And we plan on having webinars like this one every single Saturday. So be sure that you guys all stay updated to all the news. And our goal with these programs is to help as many students as possible. So we would really appreciate it if you guys could share the word with your friends, and that would help us. So with all that being said, let's get started. Today we have the privilege of having Hugo as our speaker. He will be speaking about his job as a programmer, and he will talk about his work environment, educational experience, and more stuff like that. And everyone will be given the opportunity to ask him questions in between. So if you have any questions at all, you can click the raise hand button and we can unmute you, or you can just send the message in the chat and we will have him answer the question. So now with all that has been said, Hugo, can you please give us a short introduction of yourself first, and then we would love for you to share all the cool things you have done. And I know you have some awesome games you have created and we would love to see them. So can you give us a short introduction?
Sure. My name's Hugo Bonacci. I work as a software engineer. I work at a company called teaching.com right now. Teaching.com, you might have used some of their like online games, their educational games. I'm sorry, hang on just 1 second. Let me close my door in my room.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, there's a possibility that you might play some of the games. Pretty popular game that we have called Nitro Type. It's a car racing game. It's typing practice, and I'm the graphics engineer on that one right now. That's not, so before that, I worked at a handful of other companies. This is what I'm going to talk about here in a couple of minutes. Like the different types of careers and stuff that you can fall into as far as programming is concerned and how it spreads out. But the one before this was a company named Envision, and they did, again, graphics tools. I was graphics engineer and I did a lot of stuff like that. As far as education is concerned, I have an associate's degree in software development from a technical college. The thing that has worked best for me over the years, honestly, has been staying up to date with modern technology, getting certifications, having a portfolio of work that I've gotten done, and being able to show stuff that I've accomplished over the years. I'm actually going to show that a little bit as well. After that, as far me on a personal level, married, I have a couple kids, I have a dog, there's some cats running around here too. And this is actually my home office here. I'm going to pull the camera back so you can see. I've worked from home. I've actually worked from home for probably about 6, almost 7 years now. So everybody having to go remote. And that's actually one of the great advantages about software engineering is you can, even before all this stuff going on now, you could work remote. So you can work with some really companies on some very interesting projects across the world. I have friends that are in other countries now. I have friends that are in other countries now that I stay in contact with, and we still work on projects together, and it's pretty great.
Okay, thank you. So is there some of the stuff you would like to share with us? The things you've worked on?
I'm going to share my screen real quick. So I'm going to preface this with just a little bit more about the getting started stuff. So I actually got started programming. Can you see my screen? It's a very old looking computer. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about getting started from a programming perspective for me. I actually got started very, very young. In fact, this right here was probably the very first kind of computer I used for writing software. This is a Commodore 64. I had actually used some other computers. I think we had these things called Apple IIs. Have you ever seen the really ancient computers that are all black letters or black screen with green letters on it and stuff? Those were real. Yeah, those were real. And that's actually one of the first computers I started on. This one right here, though, I used to plug it into my TV at home, and I would have books, and I would just sit there and work on learning how to do programs. It was very slow. It was very difficult to do, but it was very fascinating, right? Because programming gave you an opportunity to solve a problem that that, you know, in kind of an automated fashion, you could spit out messages on the screen hundreds of times faster than you could possibly ever write it down or type it yourself. So it all kind of started with stuff like this. So I started probably when I was maybe 5 or 6 with a really old computer like this. Over the years, they upgraded. I think people might have seen these before at some point or another. Again, I continued programming over the years. In middle school, we had computers that looked like this. I ended up going to a computer programming competition for the state of Texas. Ended up winning best in state. And it was really exciting because I found out I was the only kid in the competition. So I don't know what to make of that right there. My mom kept telling me, hey, you did a great job because you're the only kid, but I don't think so. I think I just got lucky. So after that, I forgot where I was going with this. So I'm sharing my screen. This is my portfolio website, and this is something if you're getting into software development, or as I'm going to talk about here in a second, some of these other practices that kind of branch off from here. Having a portfolio, I think, is extraordinarily important. To be honest with you, I actually think portfolios are extremely important regardless of the profession that you get into. Having some way to show off the work that you've done in a format that is not simply a white piece of paper resume is, I found that to be extraordinarily powerful from a real world perspective. You do need to have the paper resume. You do need to have that sort of thing available, but being able to visualize and being able to walk people through things that you've done, show them that the details that cannot be conveyed over a piece of paper, that extraordinarily powerful. And I highly recommend anyone that's, regardless of your craft, if there's a way that you illustrate and show you're doing in some sort of visual medium like this, like a website, portfolio, or something like that, definitely consider it, because I think I've gotten more traction from my portfolios than anything else. It's good that I had the education. They wanted the education. They were glad to see it. I think that's what got them to look at me at first was, hey, look, you have the education in place, great. But the portfolio is what I think has sold more companies I've worked with than anything else. In fact, I've actually had quite a few people find my portfolio website and reach out to me because they could dig through my website and see what I was about and say, hey, we have an idea for a product, a project, or whatever. And then you can jump in and help us if you'd like. So that said, I'll kind of go over this right here with the career. So right now I work as a software engineer. I also worked as a user experience designer. And there was also a period of time where I worked as a visual designer. And I kind of want to explain the difference between the three so we get an idea just what kind of things you can branch into. And I apologize, I'm going to back up for just a second here. I did start by learning a lot of computer programming. Initially, I was planning on doing art as a profession. I originally went to school. I was going to go to an art school in California. I was going to a school locally in my hometown. I had studied art all through high school. I was in advanced placement art classes. And then I started taking some programming courses while I was at school as well. And I found that I could kind of mesh those two things together. In fact, one of the things that was extraordinarily interesting to me was the idea of making games, which is something that I'm going to pull up here in a second as well, is the idea of making games. And having a strong visual background and a programming background was something that you need in order to create the art assets for your game and also program it. But what's interesting is having a strong background in art and programming also kind of opens up some gateways to some jobs that you might not have been aware of. And that's the three that I'm going to talk about right here. So programming is something that you guys probably are all pretty familiar with. I'm going to show an example of each. So like this is a web page, right? If I pull up my code editor right here, this is more of a programming sort of activity, right? I have some markup in this case. I have some code. Thanks very much for coming to my talk. And then I save these changes and I can go back over to my webpage and I see this stuff's updated, right? Programming also includes things like writing visual stuff. So maybe I don't like this color and I want something else. I change some more code. And this is kind of the stuff that I think everybody thinks of when you, oh boy, this is gonna be ugly. Yeah, oh wow, I picked the wrong color right there. So this is generally what people think of when you think of computer programming. It's something kind of like this. You have a code editor and you're writing code and all that stuff. The other activity, though, is design, right? This is the opposite end of the spectrum. Okay, this is the visual side of things. You come in here and like, here we are in Photoshop. This is what the designer's looking at. And they say, okay, I'm designing a button here. I don't really like what this looks like. I'm going to move this over a little bit. I'd like these corners to be maybe a little bit rounded, right? And they're in here designing a product visually, okay? But what's interesting is there's another practice that falls somewhere between those two. I probably should put them visually between each other in here, but user experience. So user experience is that profession where if you're interested in developing software, you want to make software, you want to create things for people, but programming is maybe not the thing that you're most interested in, but design is also maybe something you're okay at, but you don't spend a lot of time on. User experience is a job where people are given a task of figuring out what's the easiest way to accomplish something. So say we have this website, whatever, and we're working on, kind of a design. There's supposed to be a picture here. There's a login button that should take them to another screen. The user experience designer says, okay, well, what happens when they click on the login button? Well, when they click on the login button, I want them to link over to this page over here. And when they click on the sign out button, I need them to link back over to this page. And then when they're all done, they can run a little prototype share with other people. And they say, okay, here's a sign up button, and what they're doing is they're actually designing workflows and experiences, and thus the name user experience. So it's an interesting thing. If you want to know more about what user experience people are doing with their time or what their jobs are, I can explain a lot. I did quite a bit of that for a period of time, but that's an interesting job that a lot of people aren't aware of because it's somewhat new. It's not like super new. It's been around for a while now at this point. But, it is a newer thing. And it's an interesting way that if maybe programming is not quite your favorite thing and visual design is something that you're interested in, but building software is something you like as well, well, then you've got one more thing in there. You've got kind of the user experience side thing. So last thing I'm going to say, because I know I'm talking a little long here, is I was always interested in making games. That was one of the reasons why I learned both of these crafts. So I've actually developed, and oh boy, I don't know if anyone can hear my audio. It's
yes, we can hear you.
okay. No, the game that I just started had a bunch of music on it, and it started blasting in my ear. Here we go. Okay, so let's pull this up here. All right. I've never tried sharing this little game on a screen like this. Forgive me, this part right here is all right, I'm gonna stop the share for a second just so I can share just the game screen.
Okay.
All right, let's try that. All right, can you see that right there?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've made a couple games. I'll show it on the website here in a second. But I've also made a couple games as well. And this was the nice thing about having a design background and programming background. If you've ever played chess or something like that, there's a puzzle out there called the 8 Queens puzzle. And basically what that is can you put 8 queens on a chessboard at the same time and without any of them overlapping with each other. And so this entire game kind of works around that idea. One of the fun things about this is this game, it's not an action game. So I had to program puzzles, and in order to program puzzles, the game needs an infinite number of puzzles. So you had to, like, the challenge in this game was particularly, how do I create an infinite number of tools and be sure that they always work. And I ended up getting it done. If anyone's interested, I'll end up talking about how that works as well. So that said, I'm going to leave this right here, and I'm going to stop talking and see if there's any direction that you'd like me to start moving forward on this conversation, anything that people are interested in.
So if anyone has any questions, they can send it in the chat, like I said, or they can unmute themselves and ask the question. And I have a question also. So you said you were mentioning about the education you had and how you were planning on going to an art school, and then you decided that coding is a mix of art and, you know, it was what you wanted to do because you kind of wanted to be a game developer. So what age were you when you decided to pursue coding? Was that in high school, or did you know from when you were a child that you really loved coding?
Well, I loved coding and art from the beginning because the interest was always in, I played on one of those very first Nintendos that showed up, little 8-bit Mario running around, and I wanted to make my own. So to be honest, like from the beginning, the goal was always to make my own game, but not make a career out of it. The career plan was to be in art, whether it was comic books or just illustration. I wasn't quite sure at later in life, other than the fact I wanted to be in art, and I was hoping that. But I did definitely continue to pursue computer programming the entire time, because the goal again was to make a game. So I actually didn't land on sticking with computer programming until a little bit later. I was at school for art. I ended up getting a job as, interestingly, working at a help desk at a bank. And I was asked to help with something. And it was an extraordinarily tedious task, but I also knew computer programming. And so they were expecting this thing to take, absolutely forever. It was data processing. I was supposed to go through this this database and match up records and all this stuff. And I ended up writing a little script to do it. And I was done before the afternoon was over. I figured out how to do it real quick, got it done. I said, oh yeah, it's all finished. I'm like, what? They don't believe it, right? So from there, they started giving me small little programming tasks. Hey, can you take care of this? Hey, can you take care of that? And before you knew it, I was actually almost a full-time programmer on things to help this bank run better. And at that point is when I changed my degree plan at the school, because I said, hey, I do like programming. This is pretty great. And so that's how I ended up making the switch. I still stuck with art. I don't do it as much as I used to. I normally do it on an as needed basis. So like in this case, last time I developed a game, I'll do the art when I need to do it. But that's kind of how that transition took place.
So someone asked a question, and their question was, what were some of the difficulties you faced along your journey, and and how did you overcome them?
I think the only thing that's really when it comes to computer programming, there's nothing really difficult. It's just a matter of staying disciplined and staying focused and continuing to fight your way through a problem that you're challenged with. You're going to find things difficult in the sense that you are challenged by things all the time when it comes to computer programming. But if you kind of embrace that and say, this will have hurdles, this will have problems every single time, and I just need to continue to focus. I do need to continue to work on it. You'll overcome anything. Now, it's also worth mentioning that sometimes you will face problems, especially in computer programming, where you don't feel like you're making any sort of headway. You're trying to, you've come across a challenge. You can't seem to make this bit of code work. Coming at with a fresh perspective helps a lot. So sometimes stepping away for a little bit, talking about it with someone else. My wife, she cannot write code at all, not even a little bit. But she's ended up solving more problems with me than anyone else, simply because I'll go start talking to her and I'll start explaining the problem. And in the process of explaining the problem, I actually realize what the issue is on my own. And just having a person that you talk to is also another good way to get over those hurdles that you face.
So, do you have any advice for students who want to follow your path and also become a programmer?
It's always, and I say this to everybody, really for anything, if you're interested in it, start now. Just start now. You live in a very unique time that you can learn anything on the internet right now. There is no barrier to entry. There are 10-year-old kids going out there writing apps and putting them in the app store, making millions of dollars. I mean, there's just nothing holding you back from trying to do things. If you're interested in computer programming, every resource you could possibly need is online. There's even like, I'm going to put this in chat if anybody is ever interested in trying this out. Here's a website. I don't think that's a clickable link, but traditionally speaking, it was difficult to get started in computer programming because you would need to set up your machine to work. You would need to get all the programming environments and stuff like that. And the way that we're all connected now at this point is, and the way tools work now is you can literally go to this website and it will just create a little development environment for you. It looks just like the little code editor that I showed a little while ago. You can start writing code, building stuff, and then share your link with a bunch of other people right from your browser without having to do anything. So my advice would be start now, get excited, find something that you want to pursue and try to build and create. It doesn't matter if someone else has already created it. If you say, I want to make a chat program, okay, then go for it. Just give it a try, right? Because you're going to learn a lot along the way. One caveat though I would put on there is keep in mind that some things are much harder to build than others. I've worked with kids before, little elementary school students, and I'm showing them, I don't know if anyone's ever seen Scratch before, but it's like a little kind of kids computer programming thing. And I show them how to make the little cat move around on the screen. And I'll say, all right, cool, guys, what do we want to build next? And there's always one kid that says, Call of Duty, right? Well, Call of Duty is a AAA title that's probably got 500 people working on it, and they spent $360 million in development. So keep in mind that if you do want to build something, look at like the amount of resources and time that went into the goal that you have, and just keep things in perspective. I would never say don't give it a shot, because you can download tools and art and resources stuff to get started. But if it took 500 people to build it, the one that you're aspiring to, you learning on the way, you're going to learn a lot, but you probably won't be able to build it. But that's okay, because you're learning. I think that's the last little bit I'll add on there. If you're not successful building some software, that's okay, because you're learning. Okay, it's perfectly fine. You start building, you don't succeed, but you learn something, and that's the important part.
So previously you mentioned about that you've done a few different types, like in your job as a programmer, you've done many different things, like the interface designing and game developing and UI designing. So you were saying, so I have a question about that. Which of those is your favorite part of coding, and which one do you do right now?
So right now I'm specifically a graphics engineer. So the best way to put it right there is it's like the super mix of art and programming. I'll be given an activity that's something like, so try to pull something up real quick. I'll be given an activity like, we would like to have this one particular visual effect happen. We would like for, if I pull this up, that'll be great. We'd like for some sparkles to come around the outside of a box on the screen. Well, that right there, visually speaking, we have to come up with a way to make that happen. We either have to code it ourselves, right? Or we have to, pre-render a bunch of art, like a video or something like that. Perfect. I'm gonna share my screen again. So here's an example of something that I did. So this is a kind of thing that I do in my job right now. So you see this sparkly effect going around the outside of the box?
Yes.
Okay, so what you're looking at here is, visually speaking, we have to create this effect somehow. How do we create this effect? Well, we can either have someone in Photoshop illustrate every single frame of animation of this thing traveling around the screen, and then we play back each individual frame, one on top of the next, one next, and next. Now, the problem with that is that's extremely resource, a lot of resources the computer has to download. And you look at like this box over here on the right. Well, this box is a different shape as the box on the left, right? We want this to match different size boxes. So we end up with a problem. We can't possibly create this sparkle effect for every possible dimension. So can we make it in code? So in this case, this sparkle effect is kind of like a little lightning bolt moving around, little sparkles coming out. I'm not going to explain the code, but you can see on the left that this is the code that drives this animation. It's looking at the size of the box. It's using math to determine, you know, it's not a circle, but it travels in a circular pattern, right? So it has to translate, you know, the simulated radius, right, going around the perimeter of this box, and then animating the sparkles. So this is the kind of stuff that I do right now. It's interesting because it's a mix of computer programming and art. I have other examples, but like this is a general idea. So this is what I'm doing right now. As far as what my favorites is, I would say that I couldn't answer that question. I enjoyed them both. That's one of the reasons why I've stuck with them both. And I think it's good to work in more than one area. So sticking with more than one thing has always been something that I think is important to do.
So you've worked on many different projects and things that you've had to code. So along your journey, is there any mistakes that you would want to go back and fix? Is there anything you would have done differently if you were able to go back?
Mistakes that I've made. So the life of a software engineer is making lots and lots of mistakes. In fact, I normally say that as a joke. Whenever there's a mistake in my code and something breaks, I say, well, guys, I like to leave bugs in my code so you guys know it was difficult to write to begin with. And it sometimes gets laughs and sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes I take down the company website. So yeah, so mistakes are just part of the process. And that's, you know, just something you got to be okay with. I think, though, that making mistakes does make it to where you are more critical of your code moving forward, which is good. Early in my career, I was responsible for writing some code for the bank website. So I worked at this bank. I was in charge of the website, and we wanted to update the hours. We wanted the hours on the website to update. I had this great idea that what would happen is it would look at the current time of day, it would look at the time that that one branch closed, and it would just do some quick math. It would say, oh, okay, I'm going to compare these two times, and I'll tell you how many hours and minutes there are until this location closes, okay? Now, what it would do, though, is if you ever ended up on the closing time, it would say, okay, well, what's the time this building opens? Because if it's 5 o'clock, I want to be able to tell you, oh, we don't open again for another 14 hours or something like that, right? Well, the problem is I wrote all this code. It worked flawlessly. All week I tested it. It worked great until 5 o'clock on Friday. And that's because the locations weren't open on Saturday. And so what happened is that right when it hit 5 o'clock on Saturday, it was trying to find the next open day, and it couldn't find anything because it was closed. And so there was something wrong with the code. It didn't know to loop back to the beginning of the week, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, website down hours, and I went home, right? It was end of day Friday. I had a successful week. It was great. And I get a call from the bank president saying, hey, man, get back up here. You took down the entire company website. No one can sign into online banking or whatever. So anyways, the point being is mistakes like that will happen a lot, but I can assure you that moving forward, I've always been very, very critical of any code, especially of that nature, where it's very possible for things to end up in some sort of like infinite loop where things are trying to find something and it doesn't ever find it, and you end up bringing an entire website down. So mistakes happen, just accept it, be okay with it, and learn from it every single time, and you'll be perfectly fine.
So thanks for sharing that. So you also mentioned that art is a big part in programming and like the user interface, so what the users see. So is math also a big part in coding as art is?
So an interesting thing, as I was always told that math is a big part of computer programming. And the answer to that question is yes and no. So there's a difference between applications that you write. This thing right here that you see with the little sparkly effect, there's a lot of math in here. Okay, I'm looking at the edge of the box. I need to know when it's reached the edge so it knows to start the next turn. In fact, you can look in here. I mean, math.random, math pi times 2, math random, blah, blah, blah. There's lots and lots of math in here. But this is what you expect out of something like graphics programming. We'll take a different example. I wrote a website for my mom. I'll pull it up here real quick. And this program right here is kids would log their books, and then they would give ratings about the books. And when they were done, it would add up their points and experience, and they could decorate their monsters. Now, in this case, this is a lot of code that does things like, did they fill in the text? Did they click on one of these emotions? They had 100 points in their account already. We need to add another 20. So there's a little bit of math, but most of the programming is logic. And that's something that things like Scratch and stuff is young developers is logic. If this condition is met, what do I do? If this condition is not met, what is the alternate scenario? If they filled in everything correctly, then connect to the database and save some records. If they did not, then display an error message. So math is important, but I can tell you that it depends on the kind of software you're writing. If you are writing things like graphics engines, if you're working in things like 3D or even two-dimensional, rendering spaces like this, you'll probably end up using a lot of math. But if you're writing a program that's like maybe like a chat program or an online banking program or something that is used for, selling products online, you're not going to be doing that much complex math. There'll be a lot of addition, subtraction, keeping track of, timestamps and when things, stuff like that. But so heavy math programming, it just depends on what kind of code, what kind of software you're writing.
So you mentioned that math and art and there's logic. There's just, like you said, there's a little math, but it's mainly logic. So what all skills do you think that people should practice or know if they want to pursue programming?
Well, again, it gets tricky, questions like that. This is why I always say start early, because one of the nice things that I've found is that once you've learned one computer programming language, the second one is super easy. The third one is completely trivial. I know probably a dozen computer programming languages right now. I don't use them on a regular basis, but if I have to sit down and use them, it's no big deal because most of them follow very similar patterns. And that's logic, right? There's going to be an if-then statement for every computer programming language that you use. It might look a little different. Some of them, like this one, uses parentheses and curly braces. Others just type in the word then. So to your question right there, getting started now is really important because you'll be able to learn new stuff along the way pretty easily. As far as understanding and logic and stuff like that, I don't know that there's you can't just tell someone to go learn logic, but you can say, be curious about how things work, right? Be curious about how you might come to a conclusion on something. If you were trying to break down a problem or something like that into some sort of logical series of steps, how would you do that? I used to go through an exercise with, I would teach some kids computer programming, and logic was always a hard one to teach. And one of the things I would try to get them to do is write down the rules of a game for me as if I've never heard of this game before. And it would be a simple thing like tic-tac-toe, right? And then the rules would always inevitably look something like, each person gets to take turn doing X's and O's until someone's got a straight line, right? That would always be the first set of rules. But I'd say, well, what do you mean by straight line? Well, but how many? like, where do I get to draw? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, well, wait. So there's a grid. Okay, it's a they say grid. And then I say, what kind of grid? And like 3x3 grid. Well, anyways, you start breaking this thing apart into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. And I think that's where you'll start finding that you get better at doing logic, is that we as humans, have gotten really good at abstracting problems. And we kind of hear some general instructions, we're able to kind of process that. But a computer, on the other hand, you have to be very, very specific with every single one of the steps. So when you're trying to practice things like logic and programming, you kind of have to think of it from that perspective. I am teaching someone who's never, ever even comprehended the thing I'm about to explain to them. And I'm writing instructions for them on how to do that thing. You do that a couple of times, or a lot of times, thousands of times, you'll get a lot better at breaking apart logic and being able to write software and stuff like that. Because it's really what it all boils down to, is all this fancy stuff over here on the right. It's nothing more than just like explaining to this guy, hey, I want you to draw a little sparkle here and another sparkle here, another sparkle here, and that's it. It looks fancy and complicated, but it's really not. It's just a series of instructions that are very explicit and deliberate, that tell a computer what to do exactly. And the sooner you get good at translating your thought process into a series of steps a computer can follow, the rest of it's a lot easier. Languages and frameworks and tools and all that stuff, those things change over the years. That's why you got to stay up to date on them. But once you learn logic, and you're good to go.
So thank you for simplifying the things, because I know many times when people mention coding, it's usually very overwhelming, but you've helped to simplify it into what coding really is. And if anyone has any questions for Mr. Bonacci, they can send the message in the chat, or they can unmute themselves. So if you have any questions, make sure to send it. And I have a question. You mentioned about how you know a dozen languages maybe. And so out of those languages, which one do you use the most, and which one do you recommend for students to start off learning?
Well, I can give a recommendation simply because it's so versatile. JavaScript, I'm sure everybody's heard the word before. JavaScript is a weird language. It was never intended to grow in the to the level of popularity that it's at right now. But there's at some point early on in the internet's life, we were trying to standardize what kind of language was used in the browser. And JavaScript ended up being this extremely popular, easy to use language, and it just kind of kept growing and growing and growing. Believe it or not, there are games that you can find in, I don't know if anyone's ever used the Steam store around here, but the Steam store where you download computer games and stuff like that, there are literally games in the Steam store that were written in JavaScript using browser technologies. There's stuff you can use to make mobile apps that go on your phone. There's stuff that you can use to write desktop apps. A lot of times people think of JavaScript going with web pages, but the truth of it is there's a good chance you have JavaScript running at least in some of the programs you're using on a regular basis on your phone or computer or whatever, and you might not even realize it. So that said, I would definitely recommend that one, simply because if you can imagine it, you'll be able to write it in JavaScript. In fact, there's a kind of an internet joke amongst programmers about anything that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript, just simply because it's that prevalent at the moment. So definitely start with that. Start with simple stuff. Don't start with anything super crazy. At the very least, get your name on the screen. Do a couple message boxes. Get kind of familiar with the constructs. And then, like I said, you can build anything with it. So, whatever it is you want to give it a shot, just try it out, see what happens. And that's the other thing as far as learning is concerned. There is just like hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of hours on a video on the internet, on YouTube, tutorials and instructions. And if you go through those things line by line, follow along, you'll learn a lot. There's some very talented people out there doing videos that will teach you how to do this stuff and get started.
So thank you for that recommendation. And someone sent in a question, and the question is, how should a student know what type of coding they like, and if they like web design more than JavaScript? because sometimes it's hard to realize which is better for them. That's what the question stated.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, it sounds like we're asking, how do you know which direction to go? In my case, I was interested in making a game. And so a lot of my actions reflected that. I would try to build games with the tools and programming languages that I had. They weren't always successful, but like I said, I would learn in the process. And I think that was the important piece. So to answer that question, you should ask what appeals to me. What am I interested in? My daughter and I do computer programming projects together, and she's been into Roblox lately. So what did we do? Well, we pulled up Roblox and we started poking around with the code. And she started building a little obby. And she said, I want this floor to slide the guys off the edge. So she did some research, figured out how to do the script, added it in there. And all this was driven by her desire to add a sliding floor. There wasn't some sort of recommendation. It wasn't me telling her, hey, here's what you should learn. And so I think that if you let what interests you drive the direction that you go, you'll figure it out pretty quick what part appeals to you. Keep in mind, though, that you don't have to know everything in order to start doing some computer programming. Also, to follow up with one other point, I say this to a lot of people. If you try to learn JavaScript before you build a computer program, you will never write a computer program. I've been using JavaScript for 15 years now. And every once in a while, I'll discover something and go, oh, I didn't know you could write it like that. That's cool. The point being is that if you let your creation drive the learning process, then you will continue with momentum because you will be learning the things that you need to build what you want. But if you go get a book about JavaScript and try to read it from cover to cover and then go build a game, you're not going to remember everything in that book. Okay, you're going to focus on the thing that you're trying to solve and solve that first. You'll have more progress. You'll keep that momentum going, and you'll learn along the way because there's just too much to learn. There's too much to learn. So as far as the other part of it, though, like you can build web pages without JavaScript. Okay, you can write JavaScript code without making a web page. You can do games without learning C++. Okay, take the minimum stuff that you're interested in and start working on that. And then whatever you need to add in, go from there. Kind of like with the Roblox example. She was building something else and thought, I'd like to add this in. And you'll probably do something similar. You might start building a web page. I was working with a kid. He would build web pages about monkeys. I don't know why he liked monkeys so much, but he would always build these web pages about monkeys. And he'd always come to me with questions about things to add. How do I do X, Y, Z? He was building a website for monkeys. Okay, he didn't go into it with the plan of doing the stuff that he asked about. So take the part that appeals to you, build from there, and then as you get interested, as you find things that you want to expand into, then dig in. And I'll keep you moving.
So thanks for the advice on how we should go about it. I also have a question. You mentioned a lot about the games you've made. So do you have any games on the app store or the Play Store?
Well, I don't think they're downloadable anymore. I didn't update them. Let's see. I think that. So this is one of the games. I'll go try to App Store link here in a second, so you can see the little guys fighting in the background. This was a beat 'em up game. This one did pretty well. A lot of people liked it. I actually ended up getting put in a magazine over this one. It was pretty neat. I still got the magazine somewhere. Let's see if the App Store. See if the App Store stuff still works, but you can see there's a lot of animations. This stuff right here was all written in code and stuff like that. You got these neat backgrounds, and they were animated using code. They were illustrated in Photoshop, but animated in code. Let's see if we can go.
And what is the process for putting apps and games on the App Store?
It's different between the two. It's a lot easier to put stuff in the Play Store than it is in the App Store. The App Store, you have to, let me see real quick. Oh man, I kind of knew that was going to happen, but we'll see. Here we go. Still in the App Store right here. You won't be able to download it unless you have an older phone. The way it works is there's a period of time where they'll stop releasing in older apps, and this was written a while back. So as far as releasing apps in the App Store and stuff like that, the Play Store, you simply have to sign up for a developer's license. It's fairly inexpensive. It's $25. I'm pretty sure if you've gone through the process of building an application, you'll be able to get someone to give you another $25 and put it in the App Store. And then after that, once it goes in the App Store or in the Play Store, it's kind of on hold for just a little while. I think they do a review process, but it's not a human done sort of review. I think there's like some code that looks at your code to see if there's any viruses or anything like that. And then after that, it's done. It's in the store. The Play Store is a little bit more difficult. The license to put software in the Play Store is $100, and it has to go through a review process. Back when I did my game, it would take sometimes up to 2 weeks for them to finish the review process, sometimes less. Now, it is worth mentioning, though, this program I'm showing right over here with the little sparkles, there's a link over here on the right. Open a new window, and then you've got a share button as well. If you want to just build some stuff and share it with some people, make like a little simple game, you can use a tool like this, and then you got a nice share button you can use right there. In fact, there's a great number of tools that you can use online to build some games and then share them with other people. Or even if you wanted to build like an app, like a simple program or something like that, a tool like this helps you get started with the sharing process. But if you do want to publish it in the store, those are the couple things right there. Is you do have a review process. After the review process, your app will show up in the store. And then, of course, the license.
And so out of all the projects you've done, like this game that you've made and the other games you've made, which project was your favorite project out of all of them?
Out of the games that I've built?
I guess out of any project you've done.
I couldn't answer that question. I've been fortunate. I've gotten to work on a lot of very interesting things. Games are fun. I've enjoyed building games a lot. I've made different kinds of games. I get to watch people play the games, and that's been, enjoyable. I'll learn something brand new. Like, for example, this background, I learned a 3D modeling program so I can build the background. So for me, the learning experience is probably the most fun part of a project. So picking a favorite, it's hard to say. Like this project right here, when I worked at Envision, we started making a design program where you could use your Apple pencil and just draw lines, and it would figure out what shapes you actually meant. This was supposed to be a toggle button, stuff like that. That was extraordinarily fun because there was nothing like it, right? We had to solve problems that we've never solved before. And in fact, I think that's the thing that interests me the most about computer programming at this point in my career. I've written a million business applications. I haven't written a million, but you know what I mean? Like, I've done a lot of business applications, but anytime you're given the opportunity to like uniquely challenge yourself with something that's never been written before, solve a problem that is unique, something that doesn't have a template or a standard practice, I think those are the problems that you will enjoy the most. At the beginning, anything that you write, if it just works, you're normally pretty happy with that. But after a period of time, you want to see something that really makes your brain work to figure out, how am I going to solve this problem? How am I going to make this thing work? And I think those are always my favorite projects, are the ones that make me think a lot.
So there are many different parts to making a game, like you mentioned. And so how long does it usually take to make a whole game? Does it take like a very long time? And also, since there's many parts, does a different person work on one part and a different person work on the other part? And do they have to combine the two parts?
So generally speaking, as far as my games were concerned, I built them myself. It took longer because I built it myself. I would do the art and design and stuff like that alone, and I would get people to test and play it, and then off you go. I do recommend working with teams because you will eventually work with teams. However, I'm going to put this link in the chat as well. There you go. Oh, yes, wonderful. If you are getting interested in building games, though, there are shortcuts you can take to get things moving a little bit quicker. Forgive me, I'm trying to find my chat window here. So like this website right here, you can call it itch.io/game assets. People that just love designing, love making art, and they'll share their art assets that you can just plug right into your game. So you can start programming without actually having to do the art first. Normally, the worst thing they ask for is, would you please put me in the game credits, which is pretty fair, right? If somebody gives you, a great looking set of, art assets like this one right here, put their name in the credits, no big deal, right? But what's so awesome about this is that you can take this, there's a download link somewhere at the bottom. You'll notice that when you hit download, it puts money up here, but you can always download for free. Yeah, no thanks, just taking your downloads. So for, at the beginning, you might just download some art assets for free. But if you end up liking them and you want to kind of pay them back, you say, hey, here's $10. Thanks for letting me use that. The point being is, if you are wanting to build a game, getting a team together is hard. And then keeping those people consistent on getting the work done is also hard unless they're equally invested in it. But if you're wanting to get started computer programming, building a game, you can use websites like this to download a bunch of game art assets for free and start building your game. So you want to make a card game? Well, here's a whole, art kit of cards, right? You need some food for your game? Here's a whole pixel set of art. So that's a good way to get moving right there if you want some high velocity. Otherwise, if you do work with a team, you got to have a lot of people that are equally invested in making sure it gets done.
So a few people asked a few questions. The first question was, what type of hardware do you need to start coding? Like, do you need a computer, an iPad, or what do you need?
Well, if you're just wanting to get started, I highly recommend this code sandbox.io because it takes away everything. Okay, you don't have to set up an environment. You don't have to download a code editor. You don't have to do anything. If you need, there's this little button here called add dependency. If you need to include some, there are things called libraries. If I want to make a video game, I can download a game library that makes it easier for me. It's just, I can say, okay, I want to put some pixels and stuff, little sprites over here, and it will do the work for me. The point being is, all that's now managed inside this one web page, and you'll be able to pull up this web page from anywhere and continue working without having to set up anything on your own personal machine. It is a website that will do it all for you. Once you want to start setting up your own machine to do stuff, because there is a lot of advantage to being able to build stuff locally on your personal machine, I would go out and look around for tutorials. It changes depending on what you're trying to build. For example, the game that I showed earlier with the little chess pieces, that used a tool local to my machine. And I had to download it, I had to get it set up, I had to point it to the folder that had all the art assets in it. But definitely, if you didn't already, copy this code sandbox.io link. And this lets you get started now with no work on your end. You don't have to do anything on your machine, just off you go. Start coding, start experimenting. In fact, real quick, I'll show you. Click on this create sandbox button and you get all these template types. So maybe I want to make a new web page. So I'll click on this vanilla code sandbox thing. You can see on the right, it says hello vanilla. And then I can see over here, oh, look, code. So if I just say hello career 360, whoops, career talk. And you'll notice on the right, it's just automatically updating as I go. So this is JavaScript right here. So I want to do alert hello. Oh, you won't be able to see it on your side, but a little pop-up box showed up on my screen. So very quick, very easy. You get started, absolutely no setup required on your machine.
So that's cool. Thank you for sharing that. And the other question that someone asked is, do people get paid to test games, and especially from big companies?
So I hear a lot about that game tester thing. Game testing is a thing. It is real. The problem with game testing that a lot of people don't realize is they don't want you to test playing the game. What they want you to do is, I have I have this wall in the game, I want you to run down this wall and jump and duck and crouch on every single possible part of this wall to make sure that you can't clip out of bounds. Uh, I don't want you to play the normal game path. What I want you to do is I want you to test all of the possible places where somebody could break the game, get out of bounds. Your job is to find bugs, not test and see if you like it. It's more test and make sure that there's no programmer errors in there. So it is a real job, but it's not generally as much fun as you might think.
Okay, so that seems like that's a common misconception among many people. And so those were all the questions that I had and other people had. So is there anything else that you would like to mention?
If you are interested in computer programming, like I said, get started now. I say this to a lot of people, get disciplined about making time to work on it. Don't wait for motivation, because motivation is fleeting. But if you stay disciplined and you dedicate a little bit of time on a regular basis to try to bring your ideas to life, before you know it, they will come to life and they will be real. Okay. I mean, seriously, if I could do it, I'm pretty sure anyone can do it. All right. It's just a lot of time, a lot of effort. And I would start now, because when I was a kid, you could open up a text editor and code up a web page, and that was normally all you needed. But now, as software gets more and more complicated, there's more things you have to learn to build complex stuff. And you don't have to, everyone's seen the Hello World examples. And the thing is that that's a very small step into a much bigger world. But you have the tools, you got YouTube, you got tutorials, you've got, sites like this that will put everything together for you and let you get started. All you gotta do is make the time.
Okay, so thank you for all the things you've mentioned. One sec. Okay. Thank you for everything you've mentioned to us and shared with us, like all the different types of pathways you've done, the designing, the game developing, and the art. I think that will help a lot of students and to decide what they want to do, because you also mentioned how they can decide which one that best suits their interests. Like you mentioned, whichever ones they like to do, they can pursue it. And the advice that you mentioned, that people should start now. So thank you for all the different advice you gave. I think a lot of students will benefit from everything you told us today. And if there's nothing else that anyone has to say, I think that's all we have. So thank you so much for speaking today.
Sure. And if anybody has any questions and wants to send me an email, feel free to do it. I answer questions all the time. I love helping people get started moving in the right direction. So if you have questions, if you, I mean, seriously, even if you have code problems or something like that. Oh, thank you. A couple of years back, attended one of your HTML sessions. Ah, cool. Yeah, it's I love helping people get started. So if you have any questions, I'm actually putting my email address in the chat. Feel free to email me any questions you got. I'll help you get pointed in the right direction.
So thank you everyone for attending this talk. And if you guys liked any of the things he said, you could, and the things he sent in the chat, you can you can write it down on a piece of paper so you don't forget it, because you won't be able to view the chat after this. And if that's everything, thank you so much for everyone attending, and thank you, Mr. Bonacci, for speaking and helping everyone. And that's all I have. So I think that's it. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for speaking.
All right, we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.